All right, thank you all for joining us for this session of WGLC. My name is Sarah Wilkins, and I am the events manager for Gulf Energy Information. At this time, I would like to go ahead and introduce our speaker for you today. Her name is Nancy Parsons, and she is one of today's foremost experts in combining the science of assessments with the art of developing people. As CEO and president of CDR Companies, LLC, she sheds new light on personality strengths, inherent risks, and motivation and change performance, careers, and lives. Esteemed author of the Amazon bestseller, Women Are Creating the Glass Ceiling and Have the Power to End It, Nancy is the 2019 MECO International Thought Leader of Distinction in Executive Coaching and continues to break barriers in her field. Nancy provides executive coaching services for the C-suite and leaders across all sectors, facilitates strategic executive team development sessions, and instructs CDR executive coaches certification and advanced training, custom authentic leadership, and women in leadership workshops. So, all right, everyone, let's give a big round of applause for Nancy, and we're looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I'm delighted to be here today. And I am going to grab my clicker. So you already saw that. That was kind of a bad hair day picture. But okay, I am delighted to share with you insights on how to conquer your inner victim today. Now, here's the harsh reality. Most women suffer from being a silent victim either from time to time or with great frequency. And you know, when we go into the victim mode, it's non-productive, it can be depressing, it can be anxiety-provoking, and it really hurts our self-confidence, right? So if I wanted to be brutally honest about what it's like when we sometimes go into that victim mode, it just really sucks, right? So we don't want to go there. We want to prevent that. And so the other thing, just think of examples, and they're not all dramatic, they're not all super dramatic, they can be small. Think of the time maybe somebody took credit for your idea, or maybe at a meeting you can't get a word in edgewise yet. You have, great things you want to say, but somehow everybody's talking over you. And of course there can be, there's the times too that people speak in disrespectful ways, or there's harassment and, microaggressions. Those things can happen too. So how do we react to that? There's just a myriad of ways that cause us to go into this feeling badly, suffering as a victim. And even though I'm pretty assertive and so forth, from time to time it happens to me. Probably some of you have had this happen where you come up with an idea at a meeting and you're the only woman, and nobody notices, nobody says anything about your idea, and about 20 minutes later, one of the guys, in this case, it was a group of executive coaches, we were on a committee, Simon comes up with the same identical idea, and guess what? Then it was a good idea. But, right in that moment, it's very difficult to express yourself. You kind of just shrug and move on, right? So these are some of the daily things. And, of course, some of it can be even worse in terms of, whether there might be sexual harassment or other things that impact us during the day, or even just sometimes dealing with our workload. The other one that women predominantly struggle with is setting boundaries, taking on too much work, especially now with COVID. We're working, we're managing households and other things, but yet when you have difficulty saying no or pushing back, or setting boundaries, you can go into that victim mode. So what we like to focus on when we're working with executives and leaders basically is your uniqueness. What is the whole picture of you? And that really, so what are your strengths? We measure personality strengths at a very deep level, very nuanced, but then we also measure personality risk factors. And these are, the other word is ineffective coping strategies, and we're going to look at that today. Here's the problem with risk factors. Most people in organizations don't know what the risks are. So I'm going to enlighten you today with the risks so you can kind of take a look at that. And then there's motivation. What makes us happy? What gets us excited? What's our performance fuel? Since we're at an energy conference. Okay, so anyway, so what helps us stay happy? That's important too. So when we go into the victim mode or somebody pushes us that way, what I want you to be thinking about, we're going to work on this, what is the trigger? What's the stimuli? What caused you to go there? Was it something external, something Joe did or John or someone else? Did they push your buttons? Or was it your own self-doubting. Did I go and say, oh, I didn't do a good enough job, or I'm worried about what they're thinking of me, and all this kind of thing when we go inside our heads. So that then, when that happens, that provokes that emotional response. That emotional response then triggers our risk factors. But so those are the ineffective coping strategies. But believe it or not, by learning about your risks, this is good news, because we're going to go through today, how do you identify them and prevent them from undermining your success and causing you to be a victim. Now, we measure, as I said, we have character assessment. We go into a lot of detail about what are your strengths, what sets you apart as an individual. And then we have our risks and the drivers, as I mentioned, which tells us, what makes you happy. So if we're working with college kids, for example, we're going to say, find a job that matches your strengths and your drivers. So you'll be really good at it and you'll enjoy it. You'll love your career. So that's really important. But then these pesky risks start showing up too. Now, just so you know about the risks, they are personality-based, so we can't wish them away or just think them away. They're part of who we are, and they're based on normal personality, meaning it's not based on clinical patients. Our normative database is all working adults, okay? And everyone has them, so everyone in this room, we all have an assortment of risks. And they're developed from the times we're infants on up. So think about it this way. It's how we cope with difficult situations over our life, and over time they become ingrained reactions, natural responses to certain stimuli. So they happen more under stress and pressure. And how often is there stress and pressure on the job? Like most of the time, a lot of the time, right? So sometimes, or if you're facing adversity or conflict, you're feeling uncomfortable. When your buttons are pushed, when somebody's really, kind of pushing on you, or if you're in a job role that you don't fit very well, we're going to see your risk behaviors more predominantly, more frequently, because you're stressed, right? If I'm not in a job, like if they put me in an accounting role, you would see my stress, reactions all the time. I would be just terrible. And also if relationships are strained. So if your team isn't getting along, people aren't really comfortable with each other, sometimes the risk behaviors show. And then if you're tired or once the honeymoon's over, and I love this one because when we hire people, we never see the risks, but about a month or 2 months later, we're like, who is this person? I don't even recognize them from the interview, right? So that's what the risks are. Now, there's 11 that we measure, but the ones that really, for the most part, bring out our victim reactions are the 3 I have highlighted. I'm first going to review really quickly the other 8 so that you know what they are, just because you need to know what they are, because you may have some of them, but also your coworkers and your boss will have some of these too. So it's good to know what risk behaviors are. The false advocate, that is covert disagreement. It can be passive resistant, passive aggressive type behaviors where somebody says, hey, Nancy, you like that idea? And I'm like, yeah, that's great. But inside my head, I'm like, that's a terrible idea, right? But I don't articulate it because I don't want to be unkind or I've got something else that's more important. I just don't want to be objectionable in the moment. And then later on, then you can either act against or possibly suffer in silence. Then we'll jump to cynic. Cynic are people who often have a very investigative mind, but they're naysayers. They shoot down new ideas. They're pessimistic. Oh, that won't work. We tried that before. Don't even think about it. Or they cut people off before they've been able to express this new idea or approach. And they ask too many questions. They're always asking a ton of questions, and people stop bringing them new ideas. The rule breaker, these are people who are impulsive, prankish, break rules, policies, and so forth don't always apply to them, especially in the heat of the moment. They'll just, be impulsive and maybe do something a little reckless or out there. We don't want them running your, safety department, obviously. That wouldn't work real well. But anyway, and then we have egotists. Now, we all know the egotists. And the truth of it is, about 70% of leaders have what we call an elevation or a high score as an egotist, right? Those are those narcissistic, full of oneself, all that kind of thing, harsh, pushy, arrogant. They think they're smarter, brighter, all that, and they can be hard on people below them. Next is hypermoody, and that's emotional temperament, swings up and down all over the place, getting a little bit intense, maybe losing temper. This one, though, it really depends on whether you're an extrovert or introvert on how this plays, because you could internalize your emotional swings, right? Or it could be externally shown to others. Detached. Now, this one in the energy industry is the number one, I just want you to know. People with engineering and technical backgrounds tend to detach under stress, meaning they go quiet, they stop communicating when they need to be communicating more, right? They pull back, and as teams, we go into our office, you know, I've had them say, oh, well, we have an open door policy, and then the employees say, but all your doors are always closed. So, and that was when we were at. So, but the detached is an issue because when there is important issues, challenges, problems, that's when you need to be talking more, right? Communicating better, but technical people often tend to pull back. Upstager, people who overtalk, this is when you can't get a word in edgewise because they're always talking, you know, they're pushing their views even though people's eyes are glazing over, but there's a, you know, salespeople, sometimes teachers, et cetera, have upstager. A lot of leaders have upstager. Eccentric, these are just people who march to their own beat. They can be odd, whimsical, unusual. Sometimes it's not really harmful. It often harms them or their own credibility. They lack some business executive presence, or they may talk in strange ways or say things that are inappropriate because they just tend to be social blunderers. It often comes with a really creative profile. So now you know the others. Let's focus on the ones that are important to being a victim. Worrier is number one, and worrier is number one for women, okay? And we have research, I've written 2 books on it. What we find, and women in middle management in particular, and in professional levels, tend to have worrier. And these are averages. Obviously not everyone, but we can say most women have this elevation or risk. And it's a fear of failure, a fear of being criticized. So what happens is people that are worriers tend to overanalyze, overthink things. They go inside their head, and they often don't speak up when they should because they want to make sure they're 100% right. So they're always doing all this in their head. They can be slow decision makers because they take a long time to get there because they want to be absolutely certain, and they can create busy work sometimes just to be self-assured. So what we tell worriers, if you think it's 70% ready, make the decision, or partner with somebody else who doesn't have that trait to help move you along. And we'll talk more about worrier, but just know worrier is number one for women, followed by, especially in professional ranks and administrative ranks, we see a lot of pleasers, and these are folks who depend on others for feedback and approval, eager to please the boss. So they're seeking upward affection, and they don't like to make decisions without tucking the boss in. So it's kind of that, and we always tell pleasers, don't work for an egotist, right? Don't work for an egotist because that would be a tough dynamic. But pleasers, again, they can be frustrating in management or leadership positions because they maybe don't fight for their people enough. They don't want to speak up to senior leaders. They're usually okay with peers, people below them. But the other thing that they have, they don't set boundaries. Everybody can dump work on them because they don't know how to say no. They don't know the N-O word, right? And then last, kind of goes with the pleaser a little bit, perfectionist. Sometimes women and others will tend to really, if I do this perfectly, everything will be okay, and they work it too much, and then later suffer some of the consequences of maybe it didn't go so well because I spent so much time, I burnt myself out. So, clinging to details, need for control, those kinds of things. So, if we look at them in this other way, and this is kind of simplified, Karen Horney back in the 1950s was a psychologist, and she came up with 3 ways that we cope under conflict. And it's you either move away, so you run away and avoid, or you move against, you go into aggression, right? Or we seek affection, we try to make people happy, okay? Now the victim, the 3 that we've highlighted here, the worrier is moving away. I'm shutting down, I'm going inside my head, I'm gonna think about it more and more and more. I'm gonna keep going down that cycle. So that's a moving away, I'm not dealing with it. And one of the things that happens with women too is we lose our visibility when we go into worrier mode. Because if I'm inside my head, I'm not out here. And then I'm gonna show you what the men look like too in our research. So, and then perfectionist and pleaser, you're just trying to make people happy. You want to appease and get everybody happy and settle by your extra efforts and work and more work. And then later on, we go home, we're fried, we're burnt out, we're like, when does it end? Kind of thing. Now, as I said in our research, we found that women had a statistically higher scores as worriers, that is women in the middle management ranks. And the men, surprise, surprise, in the ranks, in leadership ranks, were rule breakers, upstagers, and egotists. So when you're competing for those promotional opportunities, what do you think is happening? Who's getting all the attention? Who seems courageous? Yet, women, typically the studies show women outperform in leadership. They have better, that's a whole nother presentation I do about, but the women really do perform well. So under our character, under our strengths, women have great strengths as leaders, but what's hurting us and hurting ourselves is if we go into warrior mode and we're pulling back instead of speaking up, right? Then they think, well, Sarah's not speaking up, so she mustn't, we'll just move on to George over here, or Jose, they've got it. So, and then second to that, as I said, what we see in more of the non-leader roles is the pleaser and perfectionist, high in administration, accounting, financial functions, jobs like that. And that's that being too ingratiating, being too helpful to a fault where you're sacrificing yourself, becoming that victim. So I had to add a little humor. This is what we think sometimes when if you're working with egotists, rule breakers, and upstagers, and here you are, warrior, pleasers, and perfectionists, this could be the point of view. It's not Okay. So here's something else to think about when we go into the victim mode. Remember, it's the emotion and then reaction. But what we're going to look at is how do we prevent that emotion from going, through the roof? Because that's where we get into trouble. If we can, and I'm going to give you a method to do that, okay? But first, what we don't want, these are some of the harmful things we fall into. We have negative emotions take over and we allow that, rather than clear thinking, we become emotional, right? And we are hurt and we're feeling badly. We also overestimate or exaggerate the threat in our head. Oh, they're going to fire me. Yet you may be the star, we get these thoughts. This is the main one for me, freezing versus acting. When we freeze, we hurt ourselves. So we have to have a new plan. We have to develop a plan. And we're all good at planning in here, so we're going to be able to do this really well. And sometimes we project what we think others think, the all or nothing, the catastrophic thinking, feeling helpless, discounting one's own coping skills. You are strong. You can do this. And with a plan and with practice, you're going to get there and make a huge difference. Don't dwell on the negative. And I know some of us have some cynic. I have some cynic, but I have to pull myself back when I'm going negative. And I know, but I catch myself now because I know I'm heading there. Rejecting or minimizing self-worth, love, power. That's, again, things not to do, obviously. Oh, here's the other one that's very big for women. And it's big in the Southwest and I would say also in Asia. It's the fear of being impolite. Women do not want to be impolite. So if I'm assertive and I'm, being articulate, sometimes we fear if we disagree. Just to disagree does not mean you're disagreeable. It might be an important disagreement. Conflict is good, actually. Conflict is one of our best allies, so we've got to be able to engage it. We can't run away and let everybody else talk when you probably have the best insights and experience on many of these things. But if we hold back, then we're not helping to have productive conflict. And none of this I can't stuff because you can. So get rid of that. Okay. So what about your risk factors? So let's see how we're doing time. What I want you to do is really think about, you're going to get a worksheet here in just a minute that you can get with a QR code. But what we want you to do, you're going to be identifying what risks do I think I have. And I think you'll have a handout with even the definition. So I think you can get close. Even though it's not an assessment, these things aren't like rocket science. They're pretty, yes, I do that a lot. You'll start to see the patterns. So what I want you to do is identify it. In the moment, you're going to say, okay, I'm going there. I'm starting to shut down. I'm starting to go inside my head. So you've got to identify that I'm feeling uncomfortable because so-and-so is pushing my buttons or because I feel like maybe I haven't done enough work on this. So when you start to feel that emotional response. And I know this sounds a little bit hokey, but it works. And I use it with clients all the time. Breathe. When you start to feel yourself, that emotion or feeling you're withdrawing, breathe 3 times, deeply, slowly, in and out, and it will change that emotional response. And that's something you need to practice, but it really does. The other thing that they're saying with research, too, is to get up and move your position. When you do that, that breaks that cycle just enough that you can then put your plan into effect and say, wait a minute, I'm going here, I'm choosing not to go here, and we're going to help you build a plan on what to do next. So does that make sense? Once you know and you think you know what your risks are, you say, I'm going into that risk. You're going to have a plan, and you're going to calm in the moments so that you can do what you need to do. And in some cases, eventually, you're not going to get that flight response. Once you practice this enough, you're already going to have, and you're just going to go, and you're going to do what you need to do, and you're going to feel better, right? So you won't even have the flight response all the time once you practice these things. And you're going to have a plan, anticipate the triggers. And we're going to, in this process, you're going to analyze what are your key triggers. What are the last few times you went there, and why? What caused you to go there? I was being hard on myself, or somebody made a nasty comment, or whatever it is. You have to think about, several examples, and you're going to be writing those down. And you will have a plan to do something differently. And then the other one, this kind of, it doesn't necessarily fit in this list, but I do want you to be happy. And I know that sounds really, the key is if you're doing work you love, then work is not a chore and you're not as stressed. And if you're really happy and pumped up and passionate working on a cool project with some great people, it's hard to feel badly and go into emotional stress, right? So it's really important that you are working in a nice environment with a good team, that kind of thing, that you're in your element, so to speak. Okay. So this is what you're going to do. And I'm going to, in the next sheet, I think you'll get an actual form that you can download. And what I want you to do is think about, of these 11, which are the key ones you think you have? Now, I don't want you obsessing over all 11, but if you can pick the top 2 or 3 that you think impact you. Now, it's not always frequency. Now, let me give you a personal example. I know you're going to be shocked. I'm an upstager. Okay? So that's talking a lot. But the other thing that I am at the same time, my other highest risk, and you wouldn't guess it, is detached. So I have, most of the time, frequency, I'm an upstager. But in those hot moments, or somebody hurts my feelings, or I'm overloaded with work, I detach and I run away. Okay? But that's not as frequent, but it's very intense when it happens. Does that make sense? I don't want you to always think of frequency. And the other thing I do want you to think about, what were the big moments? What was that meeting that you just afterwards went, darn. What caused you to not be as effective as you wanted to be? Or another case, maybe a one-on-one communication when somebody was not respectful enough to you, but you in the moment didn't come out with what you really should have. So it might not be a meeting, it might be one-to-one. It's usually involving people, but it can also be that you just do it to yourself and you run away and hide if you're like a detached person or something like that, right? So think about that. Likely many of you will have some worrying risks. One thing I did want to mention, I should have gone back on the research, is that we also looked at executive women and CEO women. CEO women's risks were identical to the men, so women running their own, and corporate executive women tended to be worriers, but they were upstagers too, so they could stay communicating. So I should have thrown that piece in on the research, just so you know, going full circle, how that works. So now what caused your risk to show? This is the real important one. So I went into that, why did it show up? What was the trigger or stimuli? And you're going to be writing that down. And then what happened? Oh, I froze at the meeting, or I took on too much work and then I ended up working the whole weekend, 2 weekends in a row. That kind of thing. What happened and what was the impact to you? Well, the impact was nobody heard my idea. The impact was I know what's going on. I was overshadowed, or I just held back and I just felt awful afterwards, that kind of thing. And then last, what can you do differently? This is where the money is. That's why it's in bold. I want you to think about, now what do I need to do differently so that this doesn't happen again? And the worksheet looks like this. And you can see the worrier, and this was an actual example. This was a woman. She feared she wasn't right. She didn't speak up at a meeting because she wasn't sure she was 100% right in her mind. And then the team made the wrong decision, and it was really costly, like a couple $100,000, because she didn't speak up. She did have the right answer. So okay, what do you do about this? I know when I go to the meetings, I freeze, even though so what do I do? Well, you could obviously find a mentor, but you have to practice being assertive under pressure. This means role playing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Share my risks with my peers, with my coworkers that I trust, and have them share yours so you can help each other in the moment. So at the meeting, if you're not speaking up, I'm going to say, Sarah, please tell us what you think about this. So that's the format. You'll have this template with examples. I'm not going to go into each of those. Here's your QR code. I think we're also going to put it into the notes for the meeting or the agenda for this session. So you'll be able to scan the form. It's like a 3 or 4 page form. It's going to go over all the risks. It'll have examples and then blank pages for you. And I think it's a Word document, so you can recreate it. So what I want you to do, obviously, I do want you to know your strengths and develop your strengths. I don't want you to just focus on your risks, but you need to be aware of those so that they don't hurt your effectiveness or, undermine your success. What causes your risk? What are your triggers? Develop a plan with new tactics. And I mean when role play with other people where somebody's giving you simulated stress. It's almost like acting, like drama. You're going to do the drama in a safe place with your friends, and they're going to come off harsh to you, and you've got to be able to respond. And you have to practice that. And I'm being very honest. If there's one takeaway from here today, practice, practice, practice. Because if we just think we're going to change, we're not going to change. These are natural responses you've developed since the time you were a baby. So it's going to take some work, but it's doable. And you're going to increase your batting average. In the spirit of the World Series, you're going to increase your batting average, right? You're going to get better at this. And acknowledge these to other. We find when teams help each other, it's fabulous. It really works well. And practice, you saw that. Act on your plan. Put notes. Bring a note to if you're going to a meeting or somebody, have notes. Make sure. Oh, one other thing. When you need to jump in, come up with 3 or 4 words that you can jump in. George, well, that sounds pretty interesting. I've got something else I'd like to share. All you need to develop is those entry words, and then you go. You pivot and you go. No more holding back, okay? Build a support team, coworkers, colleagues, coach, mentor, and your boss, and you can and will succeed by conquering your inner victim.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Nancy, and you had some
Appreciate it.
very relatable points. Thank you very much.